Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Retail Safety Essentials webinar. My name is Francis Vermaak. I'm Head of Sales at Safety Cloud, and I'll be your host for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce who we are. Safety Cloud forms part of Safety SA, an international risk management company focused on helping organizations reduce risk, strengthen compliance, and create safer workplaces. Today's session focuses on retail safety, an area that is often underestimated but incredibly important. Retail environments welcome thousands of customers every day, and ensuring their safety is not only good business practice, but also a key legal operational responsibility for organizations. Before we kick off, just a few housekeeping notes. Should we experience any technical issues, please bear with us. We are live and we'll try to resolve those ASAP. You're also welcome to post any questions you might have in the Q&A panel. You should see that at the top of your browser. You can post those at any time during the webinar. We'll then get to those at the back end of the webinar and try and get through as many as possible. After the webinar, we'll also be sending out the recording and the supporting resources to everyone who registered. So don't worry about taking notes. We'll send that all through to you. Okay, today we are introduced by two experienced professionals who bring a wealth of knowledge in safety, risk management, and operational environments. Let me briefly introduce you to our speakers. Richie Heslop. Richie is a seasoned professional based in Pietermaritzburg, KZN, with over 25 years of work experience across wholesale, retail, occupational health and safety, risk and incident management, supply chain management, and transport. He brings 14 years of management experience, along with 14 years dedicated to facilitating, coaching, and mentoring in his areas of specialization. Richie is a passionate skills development facilitator, mentor, and coach, committed to helping brands strengthen their safety standards and operational excellence, particularly within the wholesale, retail, supply chain, and transportation sectors. When he's not working, Richie enjoys binge-watching series and following his favorite sports. Our second speaker of the day is Johan Redder. Johan has over 33 years of experience in SHEQ management, including auditing, system design, operational risk management, and safety leadership. His experience spans multiple industries, including petrochemical, oil and gas, mining, forestry, manufacturing, and major utility companies such as Eskom. Earlier in his career, he served as an inspector of explosives, bomb disposal experts, and crime intelligence chief, bringing a unique and practical perspective to risk management. Johan has worked on projects across more than 15 countries, including Africa, Australia, China, Kazakhstan, Bosnia, Ukraine, Indo-Asia, and the Americas. He has also contributed to various publications and books on organized crime and risk management, some of which are used in tertiary education still today. We're very fortunate to have both and Richie join us today. With that introduction, I'll now hand over to Richie Heslop to begin today's session. Richie, over to you.
Thank you, Francois. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just an opening. The agenda for today is as follows. What retail safety essentials really mean in the retail and QSR industry, key daily risk drivers in retail operations, how small safety failures lead to public reputational damage. I'll be covering those three items on the agenda, and then Johan will take you through item number 4 and 5, that's practical risk mitigation strategies that work on the shop floor, and building a safer retail culture through targeted training. So ladies and gentlemen, we all know that retail environments are very busy. They are fast moving, where large numbers of people interact every day. While retail may not always be seen as a high risk industry, the reality is there are many safety risks present in the retail environment, and these need to be managed by supervisors and managers alike. Today, me and Johan will be covering topics like eliminate hazards, secure assets, compliance, and safety culture, and so forth. So why retail safety essentials? Firstly, it's to eliminate hazards. Here we're talking, for example, hazards like biological hazards, psychosocial hazards, economical hazards, chemical hazards, more biological and and chemical within the retail and QSR space. Another reason for why safety essentials is to protect employees and customers. It's to secure assets. It's for compliance purposes in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the CPA, the Criminal Procedure Act. It's to incorporate a safety culture, and it's to protect one's brand, reputation, and profitability. Moving on. Core pillars of retail safety are as follows. It's active hazard identification. So managers should do regular documented inspections of floors, lightings, shelvings, electrical equipment, etc. The types of inspections that can be done are risk-based inspections. This is when issue-based inspections when you are changing machinery. Also, you could use continuous inspections via the safety representatives. Another core pillar is the loss prevention and security, the use of CCTV surveillance, the use of artificial surveillance, tags, etc. to deter theft. Another very important one is why we're here today is for employee training and empowerment. Ongoing training in terms of the OS Act regulations is a must. Another core pillar is sanitation and hygiene, strict daily cleaning protocols, especially in the QSR sector to prevent contamination, pests and slips and falls. It's also to establish emergency procedures in terms of the Act, develop emergency plans, have well-signed posted evacuation routes, functioning fire alarms, fire equipment, and to establish SOPs in the case of emergencies. Moving on. The specifics or cause related to the QSR safety are as follows: hazard analysis and critical control points. Here, management should implement systems to control biological, physical, and chemical hazards in the food preparation. Ideas that people could use are FIFO, vector control, that's putting shields, supplier control, developing vendors that are reliable and compliant with the laws of the country. And there's various types of software out there that one can use to keep following up on the preparation and delivery of goods. Temperature control, ensuring that cold foods are stored below 4 degrees Celsius and hot foods are held at 60 degrees to prevent foodborne illnesses. Another cause specific for QSR safety is equipment maintenance, routine checks of fryers, ovens, ventilation hoods, as well to prevent fires and injuries. And the final one is providing PPE to slip-resistant PPE, burn-resistant PPE, as well as cleaning aprons, etc., to assist workers in the workspace. What safety essentials really mean? It must be proactive, not reactive. This basically means safety must come first. Management shouldn't develop a tick box exercise. It's all about people and profits. A safe environment reduces workers' compensation claims. Not only that, it also saves the company's money in terms of if someone gets injured, you've got to retrain them, you've got to put someone in the acting position. So it's about putting people and profits all together as one to achieve a set outcome. Compliance is not non-negotiable in terms of the OSH Act. It's also an everyday action. Safety should be built into everyday actions like toolbox talks in the morning, depending on staff amounts, it should be town hall talks, etc. So it should be a built-in exercise on an ongoing basis at every turn. Moving on. Key takeaways for managers. Number one, because managers are section 16 in terms of the OS Act and 16.1 where delegation takes place. Managers need to document everything, maintain detailed logs of inspections, trainings, and incidents. Managers must invest in technology, use AI, use cameras, use digital checklists, use different forms of monitoring, KPAs, etc. And managers should train consistently, especially the new hires. Inductions should take place. Veteran staff, because a culture sets in of we've been doing it every day, so veteran staff should be catered on a continuous basis to update them on new safety protocols. Moving on. Compliance. So when we state that compliance must not merely be a tick box exercise, we are basically meaning that managers sometimes sometimes prioritize admin instead of identifying risks and hazards within the workspace. It also becomes the complacency sets in because it becomes a tick box exercise. So one needs to take into account the OSX sections and regulations. Apologies for that. One needs to take into account Section 7, where managers have to develop policy, use the document hierarchy that's develop policy, follow, develop checklists, develop SOPs, standard operating procedures. Section 8 and 14, Johan will enlighten you more on those two sections. It's the employer responsibilities and employee responsibilities. Section 9 is very important for retail because members of public, the Act stipulates that managers should be accountable for members of public visiting their sites. Section 13, the rights of employees. Section 16 is the delegation of powers. Section 16 is the manager is ultimately responsible in terms of direct liability. Section 24 is the reporting of incidents to the Department of Labor or major incidents. Then Section 37 to 39 deals with the offenses should management and supervisors not comply with the OS Act. The OS Act regulations also should be taken into account when dealing with safety to ensure that it's not a tick box exercise. The Criminal Procedure Act in terms of omission and vicarious liability. So omission is where you fail to do something, and vicarious liability states that a manager or supervisor is directly accountable for all actions for his subordinates should something occur within the retail space. Moving on. So just a key for you. So Section 38 states that it's an offense for a manager where someone gets injured or is hurt within the workspace. He can face a jail time of 2 years or a fine of up to 100,000 rand, a fine up to 100,000 rand. Section 37 details that Section 37 details that the manager is also responsible for all contractors who visit sites unless he's delegated those responsibilities to that contractor. And then direct liability speaks that the manager is responsible for or will be held accountable for any negligence should a person be maimed, injured, or be killed under his direct liability or his direct control. Moving on. So I've just given you 2 examples of case law that we've researched and found. There's many more out there. The one is vicarious liability, just the context. A welder was killed by a drilling machine while cleaning it. The case law, the outcome was that the employer was found guilty of contravening the OS Act and fined 50,000 rand or 12 months imprisonment. So what they found in the investigation here was there was a lack of training, there was a lack of supervision. Supervision is very important. And there was a lack of improper work procedures. There was no SOPs in place. Then there was an act of omission where a supervisor in the mining industry did not follow specific rules. He omitted to inform the workers of specific issues, and he was dismissed within his workspace. And the Labour Court found in favor of the mining company. Moving on. Leg 2 of our presentation is main safety risk drivers in the retail safety industry. These are common ones, but these are the ones that have been researched and found to impact on retail and QSR. Number 1 is slips, trips, and falls. These are the most common hazards, often caused by spills, wet cleaning floors, or cluttered aisles. Another second one is manual handling and ergonomics. Here, the regulations should be used. The OS Act regulation should be used to give you a guidance in terms of ergonomics. They're talking about try and make the workspace for the employee, not design the workspace for the employee, not the employee for the workspace. Manual handling, the regulations speak about lifting, etc., and gives a guide to management now on the specific kgs a person can lift, etc. Fire hazards, where there's blocked emergency exits, the fire equipment is faulty, the wiring is faulty, There are physical and security violence, risk from armed robberies where workers are working on their own, the night shifts, the shoplifting, aggressive customers, electrical safety, where there's overloaded electrical sockets and damaged equipment within the workspace. Another risk driver is workplace transport, where hazards involving forklifts, when workers end up doing playing with forklifts within the workspace. Then there are safety management failures. Moving on. Okay, the main safety risk drivers in the QSR industry are temperature control failures. This is a primary risk, especially where during the delivery of storage, the goods are delivered at incorrect temperatures. So management is encouraged to use blockchain technology and other web cloud tools to trace the delivery and storage of goods. It's hygiene and staff behavior, very important. We all know that hygienist staff should be coming clean to work, cleaning surfaces, especially in using face masks, etc., and delivery of food. Another one is operational hazards such as slips, trips, and falls. They also aligned with the retail space. Burns and cuts, because most of the time in the QSR it's cooking, etc. Manual handling and strain, offloading of goods, supply and receiving risks. So management should put into place software tools to manage the receiving and delivery of goods. Security and safety risks, or safety threats for that matter. The risk of armed robbery where workers are working on their own, or where there's no security at the doors. High turnover and training gaps. Workers are not trained. It's merely a tick box exercise. Workers are attending training just to get the certificates and place them in their safety files. Infrastructure issues and regulatory pressure, where the Department of Labor comes in and does inspections. Moving on. When safety lapses become public risk, is part 3 of our agenda. These safety lapses become public risk where members of public visit the sites where in infrastructure and public spaces, where public entities or contractors are not managing those spaces. Environmental hazards, where accidents occur due to safety protocols. There's a failure of risk assessments. Organizations are not doing continuous risk assessments or issue-based risk assessments when new equipment comes in. There's public health crisis. Inadequate safety measures in high-stakes environment can lead to infections or illnesses that can spread to the community or members of public. Moving on. Why lapses turn public? Because we normalize risk. This means we usually take shortcuts in our duties. We bypass certain protocols, SOPs, checklists. We just do that as a tick box exercise. So these risks, they fade over time and it becomes tolerant in our workspace, which leads to danger and in the end to someone losing their life within the workspace. Intentional violations. This is where workers intentionally bypass procedures to save time because they put under pressure by management to deliver on targets, which creates a very dangerous, sort of dangerous precedent or dangerous situation. The failure to manage combined risks. Organizations often evaluate risks in isolation. They don't see that by, for example, a fire starting, that risk can compound and lead to damage of equipment, damage of computer software, etc. So the risk can be compounded. And management having a macho safety culture where they prioritize production over safety and view regulations as unnecessary and a hindrance to reaching their targets. These lead to accidents and death within the workspace. Moving on. The consequences of these safety lapses, guys, is reputational damage. One story on Facebook, story on Instagram can damage the reputation of a company. I'm aware of one in the Durban region at the moment where food was sold was not kept in the refrigerator, so this company is taking a huge sort of reputational damage. They didn't. Legal and financial penalties. In terms of the OS Act, you can be held accountable 2 years. The employee himself, it's 6 months or 50,000. Manager 100,000 or 2 years imprisonment, or you could be charged in terms of the CPA for culpable homicide or negligence. The loss of life and property. This is the most severe one. These are some of the consequences of safety lapses. Moving on. Thank you, guys. I will now hand over to Johan to take you through the next few chapters. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie, for your part that you've now done. I will delve a little bit deeper into the bolts and nuts of what you've said. I will cover Section 8 of the OSH Act, as well as then also the duties of the employee. I'll also speak a little bit about the risk assessment itself, the process, and then also at the end, I will just summarize and give you an example of a real incident or an accident that I investigated. And if you look at from what Richie said from the beginning and what I'm going to say, and with all the lapses and the things that went wrong there, if the proper management tools were not used and also processes were not put into place. Without further ado, let's start off with Section 8 of the OSH Act now. And I'm not going to go bullet for bullet. It was summarized it somehow so that you can understand. It's important to note here that if Section 8 of the OSH Act, is like barbed wire, and if something is not covered in the regulations, they normally come back, the authorities and so forth, and then they come to this. It's very grayish in certain times, the requirements in the section itself. So what will happen is they will rely on this, and if you haven't put any proper systems in place or proper measures, implement proper measures, you will be caught up within this. So you are duly warned, and it is better to ensure that you've got proper systems in place and not being caught out at the end of the day. So the first thing, and it's important, that the employer should provide a system of work. A system is everything. It's people, it's the environment, it's procedures, the processes, everything works together, and that's a system of work, how things are happening on site. So it is the duty of the employer to make sure that the plant and machinery, everything around that is there to ensure a safe environment without risk to health. Also then to take reasonable practicable steps to eliminate or to mitigate hazards or potential hazards before resorting. So you must first of all then look at what you can do in terms from, looking at the hierarchy of controls before you get to the last resort, and that is PPE. So you need to consider certain controls. The employer should then consider that. Also, then the implementation of arrangements. Now that is basically the facility. Where are we going to store what? And then also that will include then the use and the handling, storage, the transportation of articles, substances, and in certain cases, we in the retail environment, we work with acids and, chlorine, and where do we store it and how do we handle it and so forth. That's important that the employer needs to take that into consideration. Also, then the identification of hazards to the health and safety of persons attached to any work, as well as then also, precautionary measures, and that I will also get to that. It's very important here then also that we just don't think about the employees, or we must also look, as Richie correctly said, as public as well. So because they come into a space and they walk within a space, and that's even in a manufacturing environment, you need to take care of those people coming into your environment. Then also, then the necessary to provide the necessary means to implement it. So we must have some sort of training. We must have some sort of information before people get onto site, and to make sure that these precautionary measures are then implemented. Let's move on. Then also, to provide, I already touched on that, provide information, certain instructions, training and supervision. So information is before even getting onto site, you will find signage and, you know, outside entrances to shops and so forth. It should be identified to say this is the environment that you go in, and that people know, you know, if there's going to be noise, if there are any chemicals, things like that, we need to inform them beforehand. The same is then with training, the provision of training. I will touch on training a bit later on, the types of training, and then also why it's so important, and then also supervision. In my example, you will see what the importance of proper supervision is required when people are performing tasks, and even if untrained or inexperienced persons are performing specific tasks. And then also implementation of measures to prevent employees from conducting any work unless the precautionary measures are taken and is put in place. Now, to think about, to bring this into the right context, is a few years ago, I can still remember I was sitting one day and working in a specific area, and as I looked out, I saw the Macro store was on fire there in Roodepoort. So, and it burned for days. So, and actually what happened at the end of the day, so what happened there? There was a problem, issue with the hot work permit. So that shows you, you know, that's a dangerous work. So the process to follow that, you know, and to implement those and to make sure that somebody can go back later into the environment, and then also verify that, you know, no fires and so forth. So that is those precautionary measures. You put certain documents and certain measures in place to prevent certain things from happening, not in the normal run of the mill, but specifically like working on the roofs and so forth. They need special permits from the safety department or from the managers in the specific area. Also to ensure that the requirements of the Act are complied with. That's why we will find that your Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the abbreviated version of the OSH Act, is displayed in areas, green areas, or in eating areas and so forth, so that people can read through it and that they know what they should do, and then also, you know, from equipment used on the site itself. Then also important is the enforcement of precautionary measures. The employee will put certain measures in place. They will request people to perform certain duties. They will put certain, you know, ask them, you know, and train them and inform them. However, you do sometimes get people, you know, they do not follow it. And Richie mentioned the shortcuts, you know, because it's very easy just to take, you know, instead of going to do a lockout, you quickly run and you just switch it off at the wall and then change the globe and then come back and then switch it on again. That should not be. It should be proper isolation. Things like that should be in place, so that those precautionary measures should be in place. And in big industry or heavy industry, and where it's in a dangerous environment, this is a reason sometimes not performing this or not adhering to it is a reason for immediate dismissal in certain cases, because you're not just endangering your own life, you're endangering everybody in the environment itself. Then also, the second last one here is the general supervision of persons, you know, workers, by a person that is trained, understand the hazards. Now, that means that person should be involved during the risk assessment process and also understand what's going on. We can't take, you know, somebody because he just came out of university and so forth. Yes, he's got the knowledge, but that experience and so forth to guide a person, you know, you need an experienced hand to say this is the way it should be done and oversee that how the work is done. And then also to inform, as Richie already indicated, inform the employees with regards to their authority. This is typically what will come in is the right of refusal to work. The right of refusal to work. So when something or the environment is so dangerous and that you feel that, you know, you're uncomfortable to go into a specific area to perform a specific task, the employee can, you know, then basically say no, but it's not just a random. So what will happen here is there are specific steps. He needs to go to the safety representative. The safety representative will go to the supervisor. The supervisor will go to the area manager. The area manager will then go to the store manager or the CEO itself. So you can't just stop working if you feel unsafe and so forth. Next slide. Now coming to the duties of the employee. Now we've got the employer. They've got lots of things to do and things to think about, but then also now we've got the employee in terms of Section 14. They need to take reasonable care. So it's not just for their personal safety, but safety for others, and that includes as well the shopper, the shoppers and so forth. And by not engaging in horseplay and taking unnecessary risks, pushing trolleys, just around without thinking about other people, or putting equipment down and conduct certain unsafe acts and creating unsafe conditions itself. Then also it's their duty to comply with reasonable, health and safety policies, procedures, and training that they receive. That is given in good faith, and it is then expected from the employee to follow that within reason, if it's reasonable. Then also looking at incidents itself and accidents. Now, immediately report dangerous situations, broken equipment, or accidents. Coming to the incidents itself, where people are injured, Richie mentioned Section 24. Those are typical safety-related incidents. But then we also got Section 25. That is health, where we've got health-related incidents. So somebody, with regards to health. So it's not just Section 24, also looking at Section 25 incidents that needs to be reported. And it should be immediately reported before the end of the shift. Not come on Monday and say, listen, I was injured on Friday. It should be immediately reported itself. Then also the use of safety equipment or equipment itself, that's PPE. It's very costly in certain cases, certain PPE, so the correct use thereof, because it doesn't help if you wear a dust mask the other way around. Instead of having the clip over your nose, I've found people having it on their chin. So then you should not have even worn it. So that is also where the training comes in, and then also the cleaning thereof. Then safety devices properly. If interlocks on machines itself or deaf man's grips, found in certain cases they override it, they tie something around it so that the machine keeps on running, because the hand gets tired, when operating the machine. So those things should not be overridden and so forth. That is a serious contravention. And then also to cooperate in general with the employer to meet legal requirements, and then to attend the required training. That's for the workers itself, induction and so forth, and then also for persons appointed within the system itself, or within the management system itself, and to refrain from interfering or misuse, playing around with electrical installations and so forth, and damage it. It's like a bit of sabotaging there. Failures to comply with this, as Richie already indicated and scared you a bit earlier on with the fines itself, it can lead to disciplinary action, penalties, and then in certain cases with, vicarious liability and so forth, prosecution at the end, if you gross negligence and so forth, so it can be proven at the end of the day. Looking at risk calculation. Now, this is typically when we conduct a baseline risk assessment, this is typically what the matrix that we will use. But for today, I want to say that when you go into an area, before you perform a task itself, put this in your mind, have it in your mind, and think about it before you conduct it. And that is typically when you do your pre-task risk assessment. Before you use equipment, before you go into a specific area, just take a few minutes or a second or whatever, a few seconds, scan the area, look at it, and then calculate these risks. And then before you commence. So it's important that you identify all the hazards. Then the hazard is anything that can cause harm. And what is the risks? Typically is a hazard will be electrical installations, bare open wires itself. And the risk is when you touch it, when you get into contact with it, you will be electrocuted or you'll get a severe shock, depending on, the voltage itself. Going into a substation, you're unauthorized, go into a substation, you touch or you get too close to equipment itself, you will be electrocuted or get severe electrical burns. So then also the likelihood, that's also that you need to look at the likelihood, touching bare wires and so forth without any protection and without it being locked out. It's almost certain, if you've got gloves and things on, it's rare, it might not happen, but in case of not having any protection, it's a guarantee. So why would you then do it? The same is then also looking at the the severity. Think at yourself, a fatality versus, a first aid case. If I touch this hot surface, I will be burned. If I get too close to it, with radiant heat and things like that. So we are not, people are not stupid. They know these things. And 9 out of 10 times when incidents happen, then, I forgot about it. We didn't do a risk assessment. The method is, and what you should be in the mind should be the whole time to do before you commence, before you do something. I was taught, before you even touch explosives and stuff, you need to check, double check, and so forth. And that's why it's so important. Then at the end of the day, looking at, once you've identified, look at the hazards, the risk, you do the quick calculation thereof in your mind. Then before you go into the area, then you've got your risk prioritization. And in the case of a baseline risk assessment, you'll have a profile itself. Then implement controls. Then what, then in the area, what you should do. The equipment must be safe, secure, your PPE that you must wear, and so forth. So just from that point of view, from a continuous risk assessment before you go into the area, and also then before you're performing your task, that will ensure that you've got a safer working environment. Thank you. Next. Okay, then looking at the hierarchy of controls, what should we then do once we know? And you can also do that. So for typically elimination, in your cases, if you walk in, you see something, just walk away from it. Don't even go close to it, and so forth. So physically remove the hazard. Stop the process in the case, of an organization, but that is for management to decide. Then also substitute. Working with a specific chemical, you might find out, isn't there a less harmful or harsh chemical to be used, or something else, isn't there a better way of doing it? Then isolation, to isolate people, typically barriers up to create a space between the human and also the equipment or the activity itself. Engineering controls. Engineering controls is, for instance, when there's fumes or something, let's put in an extraction system, and that can vent it out to the environment itself, to the outside environment. Put in fans in to extract and so forth, to cool the area down, etc., things like that. So to engineer it out. This is sometimes something that can take a bit longer than normal to put it in place, and sometimes overseen. So the last one then, as I said, is the PPE, the use of personal protective equipment as the last resort. People do not like it. Think for yourself, if you wear gloves, you can't feel when you pick up boxes, when you touch things. So it is a problem at the end of the day. PPE must be the last resort. Next. Then Richie also touched on mitigation. What do we do on the floor itself? And he also mentioned slips, trips, and falls. Now, yes, slippery, wet floors itself, uneven surfaces, cracked floors, look at, specifically where there's high traffic areas and so forth, make sure that, and report them. And then the last thing that I said here was digital cocaine. I've seen so many people running around, because nowadays with all the technology, we run around with all sorts of devices, not just a cell phone. And people are looking the whole time at screens itself. And that is 9 out of 10 times when people fall downstairs, or they're looking at video clips and things like that. So get away from the digital cocaine. Yes, if you are addicted to it and if you must use it, then stand still. And then once you've done, then you move on. Because it's the same as that you're under the influence when you are looking at the screen itself. Your mind is not where it should be. Looking at ergonomic hazards, and specifically manual handling, repetitive movement, the lifting, twisting, bending, and so forth. When we lift, if that's not done properly, it can lead at the end of the day to musculoskeletal injuries itself, and then also become a disability at the end of the day. And that's the health thing that we tend to not think about. We only think about soon certain meaningful safety incidents versus this long-term injuries that can happen. Then important, as Richie also indicated, from ergonomic point of view, cognitive ergonomics, it's something new that will come in place then from the 5th of September. We need to put the correct person for the job. So to ensure that the person's got the mental, not the physical, also just the mental capability to perform certain tasks. It's very tricky. And they are still, advising us on what should the competency be of that person conducting that ergonomic survey. Safety and security, he already mentioned that. Then looking at fire in the retail environment, I already mentioned, the use of chemicals. How do we store chemicals, acids and, oxidizers itself? It should be separate from each other, from apart. I went the other day and I said in a specific shop, I said, you can't store the two. If there's a leak here on top, it will drip onto the chemicals at the bottom and you will have a chemical reaction and that can result in a fire. So, oh gosh, they didn't know that. So those are the things, and look at the STSs, or also the information then on the bottles itself. You can also advise the organization or the company, if you pick up something like that. Then equipment, operating of equipment machinery, the safe operating therewith, and specifically when you open boxes and things like that, box knives and so forth, people cutting into their hands, it can easily quickly lead to a loss of a finger and so forth. And also, if you cut into your hand, you can cut off the muscles and so forth, you will have a problem. Also looking at electrical safety, apart from wiring all around, also electrical safety is overloading of circuits in staff areas. I see so many people are just plugging into one plug and into one socket itself, and they totally overload it. And if there's a problem with the earth leakage, it will result in a fire itself. Inadequate training and compliance, he already mentioned that. Then let me get to loan work as well. Loan work, very important. People are working alone, so we must put certain measures in place. If they're alone, how are they going to raise alarm? Or from a mental point of view, getting tired, is there somebody else that can stand in for them? Environmental conditions, just ventilation, noise, and so forth. How do we manage that? Hot and cold areas, and also noisy areas, to have the necessary protection. And then the last one here is the moving machinery, creating lots of issues with forklifts and so forth, crushing people and injuring, and also collision with customers, and then also with infrastructure. Right, now getting to training itself. This is just one slide. Let us quickly then go look into it. Why is it important that we train people? It is critical on an individual level to train people for their personal growth, and so that they understand hazards, risks, what the systems are, and what is expected from them. Then also going then into, when the group from an individual then going into a group, it will enhance performance, job performance, because then they know I'm part of a bigger system. And from that bigger system, that's my role within this machine, so that everybody is harmonized, and that it can work together close knit together. It will also then enhance productivity and contributes towards safety. A person that knows exactly what to do, what the boundaries are, what the consequences are, your chances, the likelihood of something that can go wrong is less. And then also sustainability of the organization. It is to prepare people, for future posts, and also because you don't always want to be a packer for the rest. You want to go up, become a supervisor, and so forth. So that is also skill acquisition, and then you can grow within the business. And then looking at Maslow's theory itself, the triangle, it gives you at the end of the day a job satisfaction and a motivated worker, because in this you feel part of the system, you know what to do, you know the boundaries, and then that leads to improved compliance, and then also enhanced safety. The types of training that we're looking at: statutory training, that is by law. So it's not negotiable, it's not a nice to have. Forklift operators, crane operators, riggers, your first aid, your OHS representatives, firefighters, and so forth. Typically also working at height. Before you can work at height, there's specific training, or to develop a fall protection plan and so forth. The law requires it, and it should be in place, and then it should be valid. So normally there's a period of 2 to 3 years. It depends on the type of training itself, the validity thereof. Make sure that it is valid at the end of the day. Looking at technical training, legal liability for managers, risk assessment or HIRA training, incident investigation for certain positions, investigators, and so forth. So that they know exactly, to do root cause identification. And then also from a permit condition point of view, what permits are required, and what the requirements are. Systemic, that's from a system point of view. As Richie said, he mentions SOPs, safe work procedures. They call it method statements and all sorts of things. But that is what should be done, why, who should it be done, and how to follow. That's typically what you will find in a procedure, guiding you how to do it. And then not to forget, last but not the least, is interpersonal. So from a behavioral-based point of view, our supervisors and people overlooking and overseeing workers must have the soft skills, interpersonal skills. When you walk up to a person, how do you communicate if somebody did something wrong, or if there's been a problem? Then how do you communicate with a person, without scaring them, and and to make sure that compliance in the future. Then the last point here is then that when you look at risk, when you look at your training itself, you should look at your risk profile. So look at what are the top hazards and risks within the organization, the legal requirements pertaining thereto, and then additional training. Typically, looking at first aid itself, if there's a chemical burn or something like that, and things like that. So you can expand on the training at the minimum training itself. The legal requirements, as I already said, look at job categories. So there are specific procedures for specific job categories, train them therein. And then also system appointments, as I already indicated. Move on. Right. So let me just give you a quick example of what I found in the retail space. So what happened was, it was this retail area. There were people servicing vehicles itself, and they had a suction machine taking out oil and fuel to drain it, because you can't work on engines and gearboxes and tanks and so forth without draining the fuel itself. So what happened? It was drained. Then it was put in a vessel. That specific vessel was then pushed into a storeroom. The storeroom was not well ventilated. It did not have any flame-proof lights in, things like that, typically when you store flammables and combustibles in the area. So when the equipment was left there, the hose fell down, and for some reason it had a non-return valve on, and it started to leak. So it started to leak. There was a big pool of fluid there, mainly fuel, petrol at that time and stage, and it started to evaporate. Then one of the technicians walked past it, and he saw the spill, and he called the cleaners itself. So the cleaner came in. The poor cleaner, he was only there for 2 days. He was working at the specific place. It was a rotation. Somebody fell ill, so he was brought in. He just gave the area one look with his mop, and he came with his mop and a cloth and things like that. And he said, this is too big for me. So he decided that things should happen. It was before public holidays itself, so everybody was in a rush. That further added to it. So what happened? He ran around. He quickly hopped onto a scrubber, and he was happily going on with his scrubber into the specific area. He went in and he started to mop up using a scrubber there. So immediately all the fuel was sucked up, and unfortunately that scrubber, after the incident, it also came out that it should not be used to mop up or suck up any flammables or combustibles. So what happened? Electrical motor in it gave a spark off, and the next thing is there was a huge explosion and a subsequent fire itself. So what happened there is they could manage to get him out of the area. And then also he was severely burned, 3rd-degree burns. The clothing he had on was also, from polyester and so forth, so that everything burned in. So it was the incorrect equipment. He was not trained. His supervisor was busy. He went and he told his supervisor he's going to clean up, came back, did the work. And unfortunately, his supervisor was not even present. He didn't know about what was about to happen. So then what happened there was he burned and so forth, and then was taken away. The ambulance was there within 2 minutes, but however, 3 weeks later, he passed on because of his burns itself. So it just shows you, people think the retail environment, hopping and driving around on a scrubber and so forth. Yes, it is relatively safe, but it can result in a fatality. So it is important that we look at our hazards, risks, and legal requirements, etc. Be competent before we perform any tasks. Thank you very much, Dan. That's all then from my side. And then over to Francois for if there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Johan and Richie, for those valuable insights. To Johan's point, we'll move into the Q&A session. If you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A panel. I'll be leaning on Johan and Richie to answer these questions. Right, let's dive into it. So the first question, and Johan, I'm going to direct this towards you. In your experience, what is the biggest impact on reducing incidents? Stronger systems and controls, or shifting employee behavior and safety culture?
It is, first of all, you need to have a very good system in place, but a system on its own will not yield the results. However, the big issue here is, and also the behavioral, the safety, the culture of the organization, and the people following a specific procedure and also following a specific method is very important, because all these systems have been developed in good faith, and then also by following that, it will then result in a safer work environment, and then also and reduce incidents. So it might not prevent an incident totally, but however, if something happens, if you've got your emergency procedures in place, it can lessen the harm or the injury at the end of the day. So it's competency of the workers, and then also their attitude and safety, agility, and behavior. It's important.
Thanks, Johan. Second question, and Richie, I'll direct this towards you. Given the wide range of daily risk drivers like slip, security threats, training gaps, how should managers prioritize which risks to address first in a resource-constrained environment? So, I mean, I'm going to assume they're sort of financial constraints, possibly even getting some of the workers off of shift, etc. Yeah, which would you prioritize, and how would you prioritize?
In response to that question, I would use Johan's slide of the 5x5 risk methodology. Firstly, this is a two-prong. Firstly, the manager should use his Section 17, that is his safety reps. The safety reps will conduct continuous risk assessments. They identify the risks based on the severity, the foot traffic, and the likelihood of an incident or a trip occurring. Then they use the 5x5 to rate those risks or incidents, or the risks accordingly. Then you use your limited budget to sort those specific risks based on the evaluation or the numbers you've allocated in terms of green, orange, or extremely serious in red. So you use your SHE reps, they conduct continuous assessments, and then that is how you'll save on your budget, and you'll deal with the specific risks that are more serious within the workspace.
Thanks, Richie. Yeah, so a risk-based approach.
That's correct.
Dan, do you want to jump in there? Do you want to add anything? Sorry, I know that's mentioned.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, and I think it's also a risk-based approach is very good. However, you have certain controls and things that you need to put in place. But then also, there's also a principle of critical control management, and that is also, when you look at your hazards and your risks, your systems itself, certain of the requirements are non-negotiable. And those critical controls, certain things that should not be, there should not be a lapse in it itself. So like from electrical inspections and the certificates should be in place. That is, if you do not have money, you look at your controls, you distill it even down to critical controls, and that is what you then focus on. So to make sure that, first of all, you're legally compliant. So that is not negotiable. And then looking at your current controls that's in place, filter that down or distill it down and say, right, these behaviors, these actions, we expect it from our workers, and it should be complied with and implemented each and every day. So, and it will differ from site to site depending on the risk profile.
Yeah, I think that answer is fairly similar to the one before, where, systems and behavior. I think it's getting the system in place from the beginning, and then from there you can work on behavior. So I think that the two are actually fairly similar in their approach. Yeah, thanks, Jan. Okay, the next question, which is quite an interesting one, and something that I've definitely seen with some of our retail clients, and a question I think there could be a few different answers to. So, Johan, I'll sort of let you answer first, and then Richard, if you do want to jump in afterwards, please do so. So the question is, considering that retail environments change throughout the day, how can retailers implement dynamic risk assessment practices that adapt to changing conditions like peak trading hours or peak delivery hours?
Right. That is typically, when you look at, and what Richie also said, when we refer, we go back to basically that risk assessment that you do, that pre-task or pre-use or before something is commenced. So what should happen is, what the peak areas are, and also from a delivery point of view, from a customer point of view. So that is then why during that period, that supervisors and also management should then be more visible on the floor itself, and then also those critical behaviors to go and overlook and oversee them to make sure that there's even better compliance during that period. And then also to plan, accordingly, not putting any, when we stock, restocking is done, not during peak hours. This was the other day, it was like going through a maze in a shop. So I said, and people are struggling with their trolleys and things fell and things like that. So I think proper planning, as well as then a safety conscious, the safety inclination or mindset that when during certain periods, you need to be more cautious, and also then be on the lookout for customers as well whilst performing your tasks.
Thanks, Henry. Anything to add there?
No, I think he's covered it. So just that he must analyze emerging risks, the impact, likelihood, look at traffic. Yeah, I agree with Johan totally.
Perfect. I'm cognizant of the time, and I know that everyone's got to rush off to actually get all of these things in place. So I think to wrap up today's session, retail safety is not just about compliance. It's about creating environments where customers can shop safely and employees can work confidently. Thank you very much to Richie and Johan for sharing their valuable knowledge and experience with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. As mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out the webinar recording and the supporting materials shortly after the session. If you would like more information, please feel free to reach out to us. The contact information is on the slide currently, info@safetycloud.co.za. Alternatively, you can contact our contact center, 087 330 3790. On behalf of Safety Cloud and Safety SA, thank you once again for joining us today. Have a safe and productive day. Cheers.